Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Equity Series. The Equity Series is part of the Equity Alliance, and today we're really excited to explore a topic that we haven't delved into before. We're going to be talking about reviving roots, restoring ecosystem economics through Indigenous foodways. A little bit about the aspiration of the Equity Alliance is the commitment to co-creating a healthier Rochester, where everyone participates equitably in the design of public policy. Our purpose and goals are to deliver equitable outcomes to all people in our community all the time. And we're really anchored by these specific items. The idea of continuous improvement, which is probably why we're here, to continue to learn about how we can do better. The idea of making sure that we're action planning and making sure that we have goals and action items and metrics specific to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We would like economic impact, particularly to communities that are underrepresented and historically impacted. And then the idea of being transparent and having radical collaboration from government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and private organizations, because we know that the work of equity cannot be done alone. Everybody needs to be engaged in that. And also wanted to note that it is October. So October 14th is Indigenous Peoples Month. And we also know that the month of November is Indigenous Peoples Month. So I wanted to start out a little differently today with a welcome and grounding that we have utilized in the city of Rochester when we are talking about the commitment to Indigenous culture and folks in a way that we haven't in the past. So if you want to sit quietly, if you want to close your eyes, if you want to be thoughtful while we listen to this welcome and grounding, here we go. We want to welcome you all so deeply to this day, to this space, and to the extent that we can, to the traditional and ancestral land of the Wahpeton that we occupy in this moment, home of the Dakota Sioux, Ojibwe, and Winnebago peoples since time immemorial. Despite decades of forced removal, ethnocide, deliberate and historical erasure by federal and state governments, these communities still remain. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering and to this dialogue. We take this opportunity to thank and honor the original caretakers of this space. We want to acknowledge that government agencies, communities, and community organizations do not exist outside of this harm. And so as City of Rochester employees, those who are city teammates, and as City of Rochester residents, we have inherited the impacts, and we must recognize how the tremors of such violence are still felt and witnessed today, and how our intersecting experiences and identities either perpetuate or dismantle the origins of these ecosystems and systems. So with this backdrop, today, I would like to welcome Lisa Schutz. She's the Director of Minnesota Food Rescue and Equity Eats Initiatives. Lisa is an Indigenous food producer and the Director of Minnesota Food Rescue and the Equity Eats Initiative. In addition to her work with food ecosystems and systems, she owns 2 agriculture-based businesses focused on creating equitable, culturally relevant food and Indigenous ethnobotanical remedies. She'll explain what all of that means in just a little bit. Lisa teaches traditional plant uses, food as medicine, food growing, and preservation, sharing her knowledge with the community. And so we are very excited to have Lisa join us today and hoping to learn how we can all participate in this space. So Lisa, if you would like to go ahead and share your screen at this time. And Wafa is with us as usual, my partner. She will be helping to monitor the chat. So if you have any questions or reflections as Lisa is presenting, please feel free to utilize that space as well. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, afternoon, excuse me. I will begin sharing my screen now, and we will go to sharing this as the slideshow. Pardon me.
From beginning.
Yes, thank you. So I'm here today. It is a great pleasure and honor to be here to share with you some of our work that we are doing in Southern Minnesota, some of our Indigenous history, and also just what it looks like when we revive and restore ecosystems, both human and non-human, in hopes of restoring healthy communities. Here's a bit of our agenda. I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction, talk about our mission. I want to honor the history of Indigenous people here in Minnesota. Talk a little bit about what are Indigenous Foodways, United States policies and practices, history, and the impacts that those policies and practices have had. I want to share with you the current conditions in our communities, including nutritional statistics and who our regional food banks are serving. Talk a little bit about First Nations' right to food sovereignty. What does a robust and well-designed food system look like? Let's talk a little bit about our mission. We are leading the way in our area to restoring and promoting regenerative food systems. We do this by reviving Indigenous foodways. Many of these are ways of doing things where you keep food in the community where it's grown. You have zero waste practices. Our mission really empowers underrepresented food producers to enter our agricultural and our food system marketplace, and to give them the resources that they need to grow and create thriving businesses. With our network of farmers and food producers, which are over 200 in number, we tackle the challenges of meeting food insecurity here in southern Minnesota. And we are working on creating a vibrant, inclusive food landscape. So over on the right, why is this important? Over on the right, you see a chart from the Ag Census Bureau from the Census Bureau about our ag marketplace. And we see that in 2017, about 99% of our ag marketplace was owned by white. And then jumping up to 2022, we see that 71%, that percentage has dropped, but we also notice that still our Indigenous food producers are not represented in the data. Now, this is important because if we're not known or represented, how can we possibly hope to enter the marketplace? We find here in our most recent statistical data that we have that needle has not moved. Now, what we do know on the local level is that in 2023, our total farmers trading at our local farmers market were 97, and that 19 more were recruited with demographics of minority, emerging, student, and women. Those are who we recruited in 2023. The percentage of marginalized farmers that we're serving our Rochester Farmers Market has increased to 49%. 72% of the farmers that we serve at Southeast Minnesota Rescue and Redistribution are marginalized farmers. Our education mission statement is important in that we celebrate regenerative farming practices and teach those to students and in schools throughout southern Minnesota. So there on the right, you see a couple of pictures. That is a workshop that we did down in Austin just a few months ago with 55 Indigenous families and their kids. We were able to introduce restoring Indigenous food growing in small spaces. All of the families walked away with a vertical grow bed and the plants, soil, and knowledge as to how to grow their own food in their own small environment. There's also a picture there of one of our apple producers that has kids out to the orchard and teaching them about good nutrition. Now, this next slide is very visual, and it talks about the disruption of Indigenous foodways. And while we're talking about that, I want to just give you some statistics to think about. Our closest presence for Indigenous people would be our Prairie Island Indian community here in southern Minnesota. I want to give you some important things that have happened that have created the conditions that which we're going to review a little bit later on in recent history. If we look back to, excuse me, I meant to add this in the chart, so I'm going to read now to you from some notes I have here. In 1862, on December 26th, as a part of the war between Dakota and the U.S. government, 38 Dakota men plus 2 were hung in the Mankato town square. It is the largest mass execution reported in U.S. history. We move forward. After that time, many of our Dakota people fled Minnesota, understandably so. A few stayed and began to establish the Prairie Island Indian community. Today, there are 310 people that live in that community, but there are thousands more that surround that community in Austin, in Red Wing, all the way up to Mille Lacs, Red Lake Nation, all the way up to Canada. So you can see a real breaking of that community. In 1938, the federal government authorized the construction of the number 3 lock and dam, which intentionally flooded over 5,000 acres of Dakota land. In 1973, the XL power plant was built on Prairie Island Indian community land, just 700 yards away from that community. Today, if you visit, you will see that there are dry caskets of waste from the nuclear plant stored that closely to this community. This community now occupies about 4 miles, and it is still disconnected. So they have land holdings in Red Wing and other and as well as their own land that we see there. So I'm sharing these points in history with you to understand really when we see the type of disruption demonstrated on this map, the impact and the outcomes of that. Okay, so food for thought. What did those bountiful trade routes look like? What do those foodways look like? Well, we know historically, just as a small snapshot in time, the tribe that I come from is in North Carolina, and we have the Great Trading Path, which is known to us. And our local Anasanenche traveled this route all over the United States, bringing goods that we produce to other communities and bringing back goods that other communities produced in their place of residence. So we know that if this whole Turtle Island, which is what we call North America, was not involved in this trading route, we could not explain how we have Minnesota pipestone in our region for the last several hundred, even 1,000 years. We know that these trades were alive and relevant. Here on this chart, you also see one of my indigenous corn growers from the Red Lake Nation. He is one of 3 individuals on Turtle Island that continues to grow indigenous Red Lake Flint corn. 100 years ago, we had over 80 varieties of indigenous corn here in Minnesota. Now we have 3. Below that, you see a descendant of the big sweep that happened here in Minnesota that is trying to restore cultural values in the young people of the Red Lake and Ojibwe, excuse me, White Earth Ojibwe. And so these are really very significant historical points that still impact our communities today. We're going to talk a little bit about those federal policies, and I've put here in red really the number of years. So even we're going back a bit further than what I was discussing with Dakota Nation, but really these are relevant and they still impact our communities today. So in 1830, that act forcibly removed Native Americans from their ancestral lands. And this was what is known in the secular world as the Trail of Tears. Now, my band, Eastern Band Cherokee, we hid in the mountains of North Carolina, and we did not traverse, not all of us traversed that path. But those of us that did, just through the traversal of that path, many died. And our nation banded with African American nation on the same path, and a brand new band was formed, which is known as Black Cherokee, that currently resides in the state of Oklahoma, and some here, still in Minnesota, do live and thrive here. 162 years ago, we had the Homestead Act, and this encouraged Westland expansion for settlers. 160 acres of land was offered, much which was previously held by our Native communities. 137 years ago, the Dawes Act. It aimed to break up communal tribal holdings, Native American into men, and so it really got us moving into urban areas and suburban areas. And it really was a large-scale disposition of Indigenous people and erosion of our land bases. 137, excuse me, I jumped back up to the previous bullet. Let's go to 100 years ago. The Citizenship Act of 1924. This granted citizenship of all Native Americans born into the United States. But it further, although that on the surface sounds really good, it further forced assimilation into communities that were not Native. 56 years ago, the Indian termination policy, and this aggressively sought to terminate the special relationship between tribes and the federal government, aiming to dissolve reservations, which we just talked a bit about Prairie Island, and the federal services to tribes. And it forces Native Americans to fully assimilate. And what I can say to you is that the Native American communities that I work with, and me myself, we have experienced a fair amount of assimilation in our lifetime. And it's a lot of work to remain true and return to our real cultural values. To do both things at the same time is a huge challenge. So other destructive practices, broken treaties, we talked a little bit about that with the Dakota people and how that's impacted us here in Minnesota. We talked a little bit about the big sweep that is referring to boarding schools and kids being removed from Minnesota, going as far as Pennsylvania, to very undesirable places for not fit for children to be. Recently, there was a huge mass grave unearthed of children at one of these boarding schools in Pennsylvania. 67 young Native American children buried in an unmarked grave. We also have restrictions on religious practices that we find very common in communities. They are banned and not recognized. Often things, ceremonies associated with the birth and death of our community members are restricted. And then just exploitation and neglect throughout history and today. Communities suffer from economic exploitation. What does that mean? Things like taking our seeds or our wild rice and GMOing that and turning that into a commodity food, which has completely not only disrupted our wild rice trade, but named a paddy rice wild rice, which it is not, and has impacted our ability to have economic gains from that, just that one crop. Underinvestment in our communities, lack of proper health care. So the bullets on the bottom really kind of sum this up for you, and I think we've covered all of them. But the consequences of these injustices are quite enduring. We still struggle with poverty. People that we serve are descendants of the 38+2, are descendants of the Big Sweep. And some of their pictures are here, and they still struggle with lack of economic opportunities, things of that nature, food access, good healthcare access. When we look here, we talk a little bit about that. And we talk about these are tribes that we serve, that we are closely, we have reciprocal working relationships with. But we are faced with a situation where the majority of Indigenous and Native American people are removed or disconnected from their tribal governments. We are disconnected from our ethnobotany and our cultural traditions. These have serious impacts of the health of our communities. In Minnesota, we know that at least 80% of Native people do not reside on tribal lands. That's true for Minnesota, and oh, by the way, the whole of the United States. These are statistics that are well known and that are published. So we leave our Native American communities in a position of not being able to get support from their tribal governments, nor from our federal government. What does this look like? Here on the right, you see some statistics where in Olmsted County, and particularly Prairie Island Indian community, our poverty levels and our food insecurity rates outpace the state of Minnesota and the United States statistics. And I have this quote over to the left that says, we don't view our work occurring in communities of like-minded people. Rather, it is in community with a diverse group of people in order to make sure that we meet that common goal of basic needs services of food and shelter. So some of you by now must be saying, well, what about our regional food banks? What about all of this food that's getting distributed all of the time that we hear about? Let's talk about who those regional food banks serve all over the United States, but specifically in Minnesota. The statistics on the left of your screen, are showing who our regional food bank serves. 72% white and Caucasian, all the way down to 1% of Native American. What are the foods that our food bank are serving us? Often commodity foods. Now, over on the right, you see a quote from a report made by the Native American Bureau of Native American Indian Affairs. And they talk about what commodity foods look like. And they look very much like the rations program that was implemented in the 1800s by our federal government. Not much has changed. They're highly processed. They're not culturally relevant. Most of the time, they're full of salt and sugar. The salt comes in creating making food shelf stable. They are generally not highly nutritious. And so we know that our regional food bank, although doing a fabulous job in certain areas, getting vast amounts of food out to larger food banks, serving larger populations, they do a very good job. What is not being done is the provision of a complete healthy diet. So we understand also on the right side, I want to point out in Indigenous communities, our food cost is higher by about 33% in some cases as our neighboring white communities. A little bit more food for thought. Indigenous peoples discovered, protected, domesticated, bred, and nurtured. And we continue to do these things for every food species we use. This includes drying and smoking, salting and pickling, fermenting and freezing, because we know how to adapt to local climate changes. We look out 7 years ahead and hundreds of years behind us to understand weather patterns that we are likely to expect, and we respond accordingly. Here on the left side, you see corn grower and one of our younger participating members from Red Lake Nation. On the right side, on my left there is a descendant of the 38+2. In front of us is her daughter, and she is a Dakota descendant that is not acknowledged by the Dakota Nation, and continues to struggle with basic needs access for herself and her daughter and her other children. On the other side of me there is a descendant of the Ojibwe Nation, who is a descendant of the Big Sweep, which again is the relocation program, and struggles still to reconnect with her community and her family. So when we see a robust food design foundation through an indigenous lens, we know that our scientific studies, knowledge, skills, and ancient food system adapt to climate conditions. And we know that our Native American lifestyle, which is how we interact with our ecosystem, how Native Americans interact with their ecosystem, that is the definition of our lifestyle, strengthens the foundation for food and water security today. So what does this look like? If we're going and serving in a public learning institution, for instance, we're showing you there the prevention of waste, the community kitchens, the neighborhood deliveries. We're staying with our locally grown foods, which is a region, again, of 400 miles. We're leaning into our agroforestry resources, meaning everything from wild rice to hominy, to fish, to balsam boughs, to berries, all of these things that are being produced in our indigenous communities. How do we get those out as food sources to same community? And then, of course, our ecosystem restoration is always top of mind. Again, we've lost 5,000 acres of wild rice land, harvesting land, in the last the last decade, 5,000 acres in Minnesota. That is huge. And then running down the center, as we're performing each of those aspects of a regenerative food system, it gives you a little bit of vision as to how we work with the learning institutions that we serve. So we help them find funding to generate a budget to support buying local foods. We help them find and develop student internships. We replicate models used at other schools. Some of our significant work has gone on down at Riverland Community College in Austin, Minnesota. We're now working on designing and standing up the same programming at RCTC. We want to develop enhancements of this program that continue to meet the changing needs of students. And in the last number 5, some of the things that we do are listed there, such as defining space, setting up an aggregate food system that is for ease of use. On the next slide, we're giving you a brief history, but each year we have remained true to our mission, where we rescue food, we get that food back out into the community that needs it. In our first year, we began grant application processes, and we were awarded $10,000 from Olmsted County. In 2021, we did a proof of concept, and we offered the same services, rescuing over 6,000 pounds of food. In continuing on through 2022 and 2023, we tested the robustness of our food web design between processors, restaurants, and other emerging food businesses, and we brokered and rescued foods to local food processors and businesses, creating legitimacy between our food producers and our food servers here in community. In 2023, we rescued and we reported rescuing and procuring 82,000 pounds of food, and we avoided 108 metric tons of greenhouse gases. This just goes more into detail of those awards that we received in those years and what I just offered you in terms of statistics. We did in 2023 start providing internships, sponsorships, and in 22 and 2023 to the night market, and we started providing training to ag entrepreneurs to get their food processing certification in place, also food handling. Lots of fun pictures there of different people that we work with. We've collaborated with Project Sweetie Pie, Michael Cheney up in the Twin Cities. Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation has been a funder and advocate. We have pictures there from Infusion Foods here in town. Also, Kim Sin here in town has been a strategic partner. We have pictured there, Commissioner Patrice Bailey and Lillian Ateneo from the Emerging Farmers Office and Minnesota Department of Ag. And also a few of our farmers are pictured there. Again, a little bit about our pilot program services that we served here in 2023. We have LifeGate Services, Pastor Tope. We are privileged and honored to serve LifeGate Services. We also serve Promojo Women. We have a wonderful photo there from Riverland Community College. And again, the bullet points there are really about who we're offering service to: satellite food pantries, food producers, and again, our learning institutions. Here are some great programming and community impact that we've been able to achieve here in 2024. We've delivered 10,000 grab and go go breakfasts, excuse me, we've delivered 25,000 pounds of fresh food snacks. We were able to do that through a collaboration with the city of Rochester and our Mayor Norton, and also the Olmsted County Food Coalition. So we all got together and we were able to deliver some fresh food snacks into Rochester Public Schools that met a food gap, and we were able to buy those apples from local food producers and get those delivered for the first 4 weeks of school. And we also have continued to deliver snacks to 5 community schools here in Rochester. Beyond that, and again, it just tells you who we're serving, and I put a bullet here to let you know that our contract with the Minnesota Department of Ag for the local food purchase assistance does not provide resources to meet the demands. So although it provides us with money to buy food, it provides us with very little else to get that food sorted, handled, packaged, and to the communities in need. Here are some program goals that we have for 2025. We are still looking to establish an ag incubator and acquire a site here in southern Minnesota and build that site out to expand our services. The site will include an aggregate food system and be scalable and replicable. It will expand our emerging farmers' wholesale opportunities and expand our service to public institutions and satellite food pantries. We also are very interested in launching our Park Market program. And this is a program which will allow us to go into specific neighborhoods that are food deserts, some right here in Rochester, that whose over 40% of their residents, and they are BIPOC communities, are still experiencing food insecurity. And we have a very big goal to expand our food rescue to 500,000 pounds in 2025. We wish to expand our youth training programs. And the big idea here is to equip emerging and future farmers with the skills and knowledge to adopt regenerative farming and diversifying crops to meet local community food and health needs. So it really is about understanding what the food needs and wants to eat, and training young people at a very young age where to find that food. And guess what? If they can't find that food, provide them an opportunity to learn how to produce that food. Very important to us. So here's one example of our work. Here's what we know. Riverland Community College does not receive enough food to feed its students from regional food banks. In July of 2023 through January 2024, their food pantry visits increased from 200 to over 2,000. Students deplete the food supplies that are delivered in less than 48 hours. We see this in every food bank we serve. And we are seeing lapses of food availability to these food banks from our regional food bank. This is how we ended up serving 35,000 fresh food snacks to the places that we serve. So in just one example, we were able to connect food producers with Ojibwe and our Pamoja women community. We were able to rescue and buy 4,000 pounds of food. And we were able to deliver 1,300 grab-and-go breakfasts through this promotion. And we were able to serve Indigenous, BIPOC, and international students and Dakota and Ojibwe families, as well as the Pomoja women. And the question to ask yourself, if you think about this in the future, is what are our Minnesota students eating? This is the last slide, and it states some very lofty goals and has some pictures of things that we've already been doing. We want to continue to transfer and expand ag and food systems, develop and launch local food by developing and launching local food procurement systems. We want to launch a mobile market. We want to provide space for local growers and processors to work and sell their food. We want to create pop-up markets. We want to do community building and outreach and engagement events. We want to continue identifying barrier impact and mechanisms. And continue to expand service to satellite food pantries and their redesigns, continue to replicate pilot programming at Riverland Community College and others, align food procurement and student needs, help learning institutions to understand their BIPOC communities' needs, and then food services that are inclusive across the state of Minnesota. So really replicating and launching this work even further than we already have. This last slide is just some pictures of some very good stakeholders and supporters of our programming. There isn't enough room to put a picture of everyone that helps us, but there certainly is room to say this: no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And I encourage you to think about that as we move on from this presentation today, and you share with your communities. I encourage you to think about what is that one thing that you can do today to really actually help reduce food insecurity in your community. Thank you for your attention today.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you for so much information, from providing us some historical context all the way to talking about your program, and especially the idea of food rescue. And I know when we met to have the preliminary conversation, it was the first time that I'd heard the concept of food rescuing. There are a couple of questions in the chat that I am trying to get to here that you can maybe respond to. So Sadie asks, do you know why the DNR does not grant, or the DNR grant, sorry, does not cover the cost for delivering food? Do they recommend another program or offer other assistance that would help with these costs?
That's currently what we are seeking out. The answer is complex. And the answer is this: for instance, on the local food purchase assistance grant, that grant was awarded to the Minnesota Department of Ag by the USDA. The USDA then challenges the Minnesota Department of Ag to write contracts for us subawardees. The contracts that are written, all 45 agencies that received this grant have had very much difficulty executing the contract, because the contracts are not designed to meet every aspect of what is required to actually rescue, purchase, handle, sort, package, and deliver this food. So it's complicated. We are seeking out funding from local, regional, state, and actually federal resources at this time.
And then Sadie continues to ask, and I appreciate this question because I also had it written down. Can you tell us more about why the cost of food is 30% more or higher for tribal communities? Is the cost of transportation significantly higher? or are the food products priced higher based on geography? And do delivery companies charge additional fees for the service of delivering them to those communities?
All of that.
All of it.
All
Okay.
of that is happening. Now, let me give you an example.
Sure.
There's a trifecta. So I talked to you about the lock and dam, and I talked to you about the power plant. Now, the third piece to that is that there's a railroad that runs clean across, the only entry and exit to that community. And so basically we see in all of our indigenous communities that we are separated from food sources, not only our own, but what is available to everybody else is just kind of a normal, hey, I want some chicken, I'm going to go to Walmart. We don't have that. We don't have those resources in our communities. And the prices are, there is price gouging definitely going on towards our communities, for sure. So it's transportation and access that really are big factors.
Are there other folks who would like to either place a question in the chat or unmute and ask a question or share a reflection? Okay.
Can I put someone on the spot?
I see, I think Marita just joined the
Marita, go ahead.
I just was able to actually include my video now, but I will say thank you very much for the presentation, Lisa. And you and I have talked many times about the conditions facing Native communities, and I'm wondering if we can further leverage what we understand to get our elected leaders to really do something concrete to help us reestablish Indigenous foodways, and also address specifically what you identified that's so important, the fact that a large percentage of Native peoples don't actually live on tribal lands and therefore don't have access to the benefits that they might receive from being in that space.
For sure, that's a big focus of our work, but it's complicated. Marita and I have worked together over the last year. She is the author of a bill which I signed on to the leadership team for, called Just Food and Water Initiative, Boundary Headwaters Initiative. And the point here is that sometimes our governmental, if we don't take anything else away from this presentation, let us be aware that often our government has designed barriers to keep us from doing the very thing that you're suggesting. And so if it were just as easy to go to our stakeholders and that we have at the federal government level and just say, hey, can you fix this? That would be great. But that's not the environment that we work in. Those are not the conditions we work in. And keep in mind that it's a very David and Goliath situation. When our agency goes and asks our federal government to help us with our infrastructure, we're standing in line with townships and cities and regional food banks and learning institutions. And, it is almost like being heard, but not being helped. So for the last 2 legislative sessions, I've talked to Minnesota House, and our work has been heard by Congress to no avail because they picked someone else. So understanding that access to this infrastructure funding is competitive, extremely competitive. And for grassroots organizations that are actually doing the work on the ground, almost impossible for us to access that funding. I wanted to pick on Dean O'Kay if you would like to speak about service to Riverland and perhaps a couple of the barriers that you have firsthand witnessed. Thank you.
Sure, I'll be happy to. Again, thank you so much for the wonderful work that you do. Thank everybody. Thank you, Marita, and everybody around here. So with regard to Riverland, I think we've done a few projects together. You know, you helped us with assessment and also with looking at food pantry, you know, what it is, what we are serving, how useful, and you know, in relation to the needs of the students, and the process, and even the location. And also, you know, with the grant that you got, we were able to get even more better, you know, healthy and fresh food to the students. Then we talked about working together with facilities in terms of how coalition center, distribution center, and all that go wrote a few proposals together. But the challenge that I've witnessed is, you know, I was continue from where Marita stopped and your response. And my insight is, how do we actually be able to get the resources needed to do the work that has been truly identified? So we have identified needs, and we know we need resources to make it happen, but it seems to be there's a mismatch between where those resources are, what is needed to get them done, and how it could be assessed. So it looks like this three-legged stool, one leg is always missing. You know, as we are trying to, maybe this is not the right organization, or this is not the right configuration, or this is not the right grant, or you know, or they provide a grant. One example, for instance, is when you get the grant to do the work, but then they refuse to provide the funding ahead of time or in time. So now you have to use your credit card to purchase it, but we need to pay the producers to get the food, and then we get the food, but then it takes forever to get the money. Get to a point, we tried to work with the Department of MDA. You know, it turns out their own rules, as you said, it looks like the rules doesn't allow them to do the right thing. So well, sometimes I wonder, how do you keep the hope? How do you keep the faith? How do you keep trying if it looks like one is banging their head on the wall every time? You know, how do you keep hope alive?
What really keeps me going is when I'm able to see students eating healthy food, when I'm able to see people smiling because they know no food is coming, right? And, you know, I just have to say, you know, Riverland Community College is really leading, serving their students. You know, they engaged us to come in and redesign their food pantry to be more friendly to their students and to be more robust. And the outcomes and the impact has been outstanding. We, you know, it requires a village, right? All of us. But what really keeps me going is people like Dean Okay, that really cares so much about the students in his learning institution, that, hey, we're writing grant proposals together. We're knocking on the door of the Minnesota Department of Ag. We're doing everything we can as a team, right? That's what keeps me going. Knowing that I'm not alone is really a big deal. And knowing that we're being heard also. Thank
And I
you,
will,
Dean Okay.
oh yes, thank you for those comments and actual reflections. And I am finding myself thinking that this is such a great episode for consciousness raising. I don't know that food and ecosystems are things that we think about, and not necessarily thinking about small farmers or indigenous farmers or BIPOC farmers, and how as organizations we can be thoughtful even about how and where we purchase our food from. So that's something I think that we can all take from this. But I appreciate the note you also said about resources and how do we allocate resources to ensure that they are flowing to the folks that need them the most. There are a couple more questions in the chat, but I'm trying to be conscious of time, knowing we have about 2 minutes and wanting to ensure that people get to the next things that they need to get to. So Lisa, I can send those questions your way and then respond to the folks that have put those in the chat. Really thankful for your time today. If it's okay, Lisa, I might share some slides with folks that have requested for me to do that, and you can let me know if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I do want to share one thing here that is going to be on Monday, and Wafa, thank you for correcting me. I said Indigenous Peoples Month, October 14th, instead of Indigenous Peoples Day. And so there will be a performance and some food trucks and some honoring and commemoration that will happen on October 14th at Peace Plaza. If you are able to participate in that, please do so. It's welcome to all folks who would like to do that. But with that, I will send everyone off to the afternoon, reminding you that our next episode is November 13th at noon. Please join us. And we're really appreciative of those who take their lunch hour to spend with us and to learn, but mostly to take that back to the different spaces that we're going to and hopefully impact our community in a positive way. So have a great afternoon, everyone.